Chapter 8. The Beginning. After ordering the two cruisers, Cisco and Saffron, to stand by outside, Lieutenant Bright moved the Pegasus inside the Texas colony port. The 4 layers of giant airlock doors in the port were all operational, and the second and third were already open. When the 4th and final hatch opened, the Pegasus passed through into the murky twilight of the colony's inner environment and was immediately enveloped in a cloud of swirling sand. "Sayla," Bright yelled. "Detect any signal from Amuro's Gundam yet?" "No, not a thing," she replied haltingly. There's an extremely high Minovsky level in here, sir." She looked pale. Turning around, she slowly stood up and asked, "Could someone spell me?" As far as Bright could tell, she was not faking it. She looked bad. "Bamus," he ordered a petty officer on the bridge. "I want you to relieve Sayla, and I want Ensign Kai Shiden to take over from Hayato in the gun cannon and to launch a search for the Gundam immediately. Get Hayato up here on the bridge with me." Hayato had escaped punishment for his earlier escapade only by virtue of successfully downing 2 Zeon cruisers, but Bright was not anxious to turn him loose again. "Do you think we're safe anchored here, Skipper?" Mirai queried, still manning the helm. "It might be dangerous. There's no way to tell what's going on at the port on the other end of the colony cylinder." Maybe you're right." Bright found himself agreeing with her once again. "Lift oof," Mirai cried. Mirai. Bright was so stunned by the way she had unilaterally initiated the order that he forgot to countermand her and just stared. She was right, though. If any enemy forces were at the colony's other port, they would be directly opposite the Pegasus in the cylinder. Firing straight down the colony cylinder would be like shooting fish in a barrel. I wonder if we should," he wondered out loud. "It's worth it, Skipper," Mirai replied instantly. Bright did not have to complete the sentence. She knew exactly what he was thinking. He turned and barked, "Prepare a barrage of Model 6 missiles in the foresection. Fire when ready." The Pegasus moved out of the core of the port area and began descending to the colony's outer walls, firing groups of 12 missiles at 3-second intervals. With a diameter of 200 meters, the port on the opposite end of the cylinder was hard not to hit, and sure enough, the atmosphere inside the colony soon reverberated with the sound of explosions and torn metal. Mirai and Bright were right. A Zeon ship, the Zanzibar, had been moored directly opposite them, but they had no way of knowing that 2 layers of hatches had saved it from final destruction, or that firing one more volley of missiles would have done the job. On the bridge of the Zanzibar, Captain Berman immediately ordered his 4 Zakus to go into action inside the colony, and resolved to follow them with his ships. If the enemy forces were merely remnants of the Federation fleet encountered by his fellow officer Captain Ma Kube earlier, he was convinced he could destroy them with his Zakus. Ma Kube, as far as he was concerned, was a rank amateur when it came to fleet battles. His own ship, the Zanzibar, was no ordinary warship but a state-of-the-art mobile cruiser equipped with 4 regular Zakus piloted by combat veterans. If he had to, he could rely on Char's Red Comet, and if worst came to worst, there was even the new Elmeth Bits system. Its true capability was untested, but he was sure that at the very least it could outperform a mass-produced GM mobile suit. Inside the Pegasus, Sayla began running down a corridor, seized by an overpowering, growing feeling that if she moved fast, she might somehow be able to contact her brother, Casval. She knew it was now or never. Normally, she never suffered from headaches, but she had a fierce one now. Pressing her palm against her head, she tried to restrain the growing pain, and just when it seemed to hurt so much that she felt nauseous, the Pegasus rocked. She stumbled, cried out, and fell. Picking herself up and resuming running, she wondered if the ship had touched down on the colony floor or been hit by enemy fire. She ducked into an airlock and started to don a normal suit. The door from there led into a hangar where she knew there was a dune buggy. "I just hope the ship's actually landed," she thought between stabs of pain as she struggled to put on the suit. She had experienced only 2 trial ground landings before. Cursing her poor coordination and bad memory, she used her now-gloved hands to pull her sweat-soaked locks away from her face. With the Pegasus still hovering forward around 5 meters off the ground, Sayla punched the accelerator on the dune buggy and flew out of the Pegasus hatch, hit the ground and bounced, kicking up a cloud of sand. If she had not been wearing a normal suit, she would have been rendered unconscious by the shock. Luckily, the colony had enough atmosphere left to breathe, but she still had to keep her helmet visor down to keep the dust out of her eyes. Somehow she knew which direction to go. Shar, meanwhile, sensed danger approaching and felt a shiver run up his spine. If the White Federation mobile suit was about to emerge from the evergreen forest to his right, he was not sure he could stop it. He was a realist, and he knew his limits. He never hesitated to confront an enemy when he had to, but he never let his ego get in the way when prudence called for a retreat. He knew he could figure out a way to come back and destroy him later. But the opponent he now faced was different. It would not let him get away. It had become too powerful. Then, to his astonishment, he heard the missiles explode in the port where the Zanzibar was moored. He refused to believe that an enemy warship had infiltrated the colony, but there were too many blasts to have come from a mobile suit. Besides, he thought, the pilot of the white mobile suit wouldn't waste its ammo like that. He's too smart. In his mind, the white mobile suit was like a lion obsessively stalking a lone rabbit. It would train its sights on Shar first, even if it knew the Zanzibar was in the colony. Yes, that was the way a true opponent would surely act, especially if he were a new type. Shar had great faith in his ability to outthink his opponents. Lala Sun was riding with Dr. Flanagan in the cab of the mobile trailer carrying the Elmeth bit system when the Federation missiles exploded. Turning to him, she suddenly pleaded, "Doctor, stop! We don't have a minute to lose. Let me take off in the Elmeth and attack the enemy." "What are you talking about? You know it hasn't been perfected yet." "It doesn't matter. The enemy in here is too powerful. We can't afford to lose a single mobile armor machine, and if we don't do something, we might even lose the Zanzibar." Her last words made Flanagan tremble. If the Zanzibar was destroyed, they might be stranded on Texas, and that was unthinkable. "Well," he said, hesitating, I did adjust the Psychomu in the test earlier. I guess we've no choice, have we? But you've got to wear your normal suit." Flanagan was, after all, a scientist, and he could rationalize anything. Ignoring him, Lala jumped down from the cab of the trailer and, without bothering to don her normal suit, climbed in the Elmeth cockpit. The Elmeth had 2 megaparticle cannons and fin-like protrusions on both sides, and the top and bottom that acted as antennae, projecting her amplified consciousness from the Psychomu interface. From the front it looked like a trifurcated projectile, but because the fuselage contained a disproportionately large and powerful engine, from the side it had a silhouette rather like that of the Kobatan, an exotic Amazonian parrot. Using the Psychomu interface, Lala could operate the engine by will, and she could also remotely control up to 10 armed bits, miniature flying orbs that flew behind. The Elmeth. The 4 Xeon pilots dispatched from the Zanzibar performed low-altitude jumps in their Zakus, moving toward the colony port where the Federation forces were believed to have infiltrated. Amuro, crouching low in the forest with his Gundam, let them go by. Shar, he deduced, would expect him to attack them. Then a vague sensation flared in a corner of his brain. It seemed to indicate a direction, and he gambled on it. A few heartbeats after the Zakus had passed by, he ignited the Gundam's backpack jets and jumped. As he rose into the air, his field of vision automatically expanded, and on the other side of a river he spotted a different Zaku turning away from him. There was a cloud of sand between them, but he could tell the Zaku was red. His hunch had been right. Fearing he was too late, he fired. The beam from the Gundam's rifle streaked straight toward the red Zaku, particles from it scorching the earth below and then whooshing into a ball of flame. "What?" Amuro gasped. The Zaku's right leg was gone, severed below the knee, but incredibly, it still managed to soar like a red comet into the air just in the nick of time. Amuro shuddered. Even as his own powers of perception seemed to be increasing, Char seemed to be increasing his ability to avoid his attacks. Maybe General Revel was right, Amuro thought. Maybe Char really was a new type. Unfortunately for Amuro, he did not see Char put a spin on his Zaku in midair. He had barely had time to maneuver his shield into position after seeing the bazooka blast. And wham! It was blown to smithereens. "Whoa!" he yelled, as the Gundam fuselage shook violently, and the immense force of several Gs bore down on him. Somehow managing to keep his eyes wide open, he fired a blast from the Vulcan cannon in the Gundam's head as a feint and increased the power in the backpack jets. He knew he had to get above the Zaku. To attack, to even threaten an enemy required gaining some tactical advantage. No matter how weightless an environment, it was still important to get above the upper limit of the enemy's field of vision. The Gundam had a lot more power than any Zaku perhaps, but to Amuro's distress, it had nowhere near the amount he needed. Losing faith in his machine, he thought, "I'm a goner." Unknown to Amuro, Char was feeling exactly the same way. "Damn," he cursed as he made his Zaku utilize the force of the blast to soar into the air. "My MS is no match in power for the white suit." He was climbing 4 times faster than normal, but it still was not enough. The enemy mobile suit rose toward him fast enough to pass him and launched another attack. Within seconds, the shield on the Zaku's left shoulder had been blown away, and if Char had not had his safety harness on, and if there had not been an airbag in his cockpit, the shock would have snapped his spine in 2. Then a whirlwind enveloped the battling suits, and both pilots took evasive action. Only 2 rounds left? Char checked his magazine indicator and gnashed his teeth in frustration. If only his Zaku had a beam rifle. Not far away, Sayla gripped the wheel of her dune buggy even tighter and cursed her brother. If his goal was to avenge their father's death, what good would it possibly do him to die in this worthless out-of-the-way Texas colony? She kicked herself for not having spoken more frankly to him when they had met accidentally on Side 7, for not having tried to steer him away from his crazy obsession. Neither she nor Casval knew for certain what their father really would have thought, but given his idealistic view of the world, she was absolutely certain revenge would not be part of it. "Casval," she lamented, "can't you join the real world?" In the distance, she saw flashes of light. Slamming the buggy accelerator to the floor, she steered toward them. When the 4 Zeon Zakus finally closed in on the Pegasus at the other end of the colony, Ensign Kai turned his gun cannon around and abandoned his search for Amuro and the Gundam. He did not know if Amuro was still alive, but he knew what he had to do: defend his mothership. Fighting inside a cylinder only 3 kilometers in diameter was no ordinary feat, and neither the Zaku pilots nor Kai could maneuver their machines with anywhere near the skill of Char or Amuro. They were used to the vastness of space, but now sand and dust obscured their field of vision, and gravity forced them to adopt what amounted to old Earth-style hand-to-hand combat techniques. The Zaku pilots, maneuvering on the ground, could not just slip in to attack the Pegasus's underbelly, nor for that matter could the Pegasus easily repel the Zakus. Missiles and shells fired by both parties missed their mark and wreaked havoc on the colony's artificial ground cover. When the Federation forces stationed outside the colony learned of the assault on the Pegasus, they immediately sent in reinforcements, but the colony environment exacted a toll on them too. Of 3 public attack ships, 2 promptly became disoriented in the dust clouds and smashed into the colony's earthen floor. Similarly, when a GM suit followed the ships into the colony, it crashed into a Zaku, and both machines vanished in a swirl of dust. In the midst of all this, Kai spotted a flare from a Zaku bazooka and immediately put his gun cannon into a 200-meter jump, swinging behind the enemy just as he was about to pump another round into the Pegasus. Kai knew it was a gamble. Under normal conditions, a Zaku would have easily anticipated his move, but he went ahead anyway. Poor visibility affected them both equally, and he might as well put it to work for his own advantage. His tactic worked. 2 shells from the gun cannon scored a direct hit on the Zaku, instantly pulverizing its upper torso. Miraculously, the engine did not blow. Since the Pegasus was maneuvering only 500 meters above, a nuclear fusion blast might have wounded her mortally. Flush with success, Kai moved on to his next quarry. Berman, the skipper of the Zanzibar, was far less lucky. 20 kilometers ahead, he saw flashes of defensive fire put up by the Pegasus, and when the clouds of sand parted, he suddenly spotted the ship itself. He unleashed a barrage of mega-particle beams from all 4 front cannon and scored direct hits on the Pegasus's port and starboard foredecks, causing the ship to shudder violently. But then Berman made a fatal mistake. Instead of firing more blasts to polish off the enemy, he waited for another break in visibility, and thus gave Bright the opportunity he needed. Bright ordered all his surviving guns fired in the direction of the flashes. In a showdown between a brash youth and a cautious veteran, youth won out. 2 particle beams, along with 3 volleys from the main cannon and 3 missiles, streaked forth from the Pegasus and smashed directly into the Zanzibar. Both ships were heavily damaged, and needless to say, in a colony 3 kilometers in diameter, there was no room for either to take evasive action or make an easy escape. Although holes had been blown in the colony walls, none were yet large enough for an entire warship to slip through. In the Elmeth, the instant Lala Sun saw the Zanzibar burst into flames, she knew her commander was in mortal danger. She had no way of knowing for sure, but she surmised that the Gundam had jumped into a trap Char had laid and had proved more difficult to handle than anticipated. In her mind, an awareness of 2 people appeared and became entangled. The thoughts of one, Amuro, turned directly into a white light and began to destroy the other, Char. Shuddering, she recalled her shock and sadness on meeting the young Amuro earlier. She knew he might be a new type too, and she was seized by a sudden desire to abandon the Elmeth. Why couldn't I have met him earlier? She lamented, but it was too late. Her consciousness was already linked to the Psychomu interface, and while her confusion might prevent her from properly controlling the remotely operated bits, she was the pilot of the Elmeth, and as such, already an integral part of a highly sophisticated weapons system. The surviving Federation public attack ship spotted the Elmeth through the sand clouds, approached, and unleashed 4 missiles. Horrified, Lala automatically began evasive action in her Elmeth and concentrated her thoughts on the missiles. The danger level she sensed automatically triggered subconscious self-preservation instincts and further stimulated her latent powers of perception. Waves emitted from her brain were sensed by the Psychomu interface and amplified. When this neural information was transmitted to the remote bits carried on the Elmeth, they went into action. Brainwaves are essentially electrical signals, and Dr. Flanagan had developed a computer-based system that converted them into pulse signals for amplification. But from his research on people with paranormal abilities, he knew that human consciousness was composed of far more than electricity, and that it also included other waveforms such as the psycho wave. With new biocomputer technology, he therefore had succeeded in creating a device called a psycho-communicator, or Psychomu, which could interface with a brainwave amplification apparatus. As it turned out, the total system failed to function properly with human operators of average paranormal abilities and worked only with those who possessed unique, expanded powers of insight or intuition. Early experiments had proved problematic for Dr. Flanagan and his assistants. They demonstrated the existence of mysterious different types of humans and the wide range of abilities they possessed. But it proved infinitely more difficult than first anticipated to categorize those abilities. Clearly, The Psychomu interface worked best with subjects who had enhanced powers of intuition, with the so-called new types, but that only led to the question of how to define, or for that matter, how to even find new types. There was no guarantee of finding them in any great number among the truly gifted members of society, the geniuses in the arts and sciences, nor were average persons with superior intuition always new types. They could even exist among extremely ordinary traditional people with a rigid sense of self and relatively little heightened awareness. Lala Sun was herself a case in point, as the Flanagan team realized from the moment she had joined the project as a subject. She had no higher education to speak of, nor was her IQ particularly outstanding, but her ability to activate the Psychomu interface was so unusual that they could scarcely believe their own data. What, they then began to wonder, was a true new type? Unable to come up with a single concrete definition, they were forced to conclude merely that new type subjects were characterized mainly by a power of insight greater than anything ever before recorded in research on human consciousness. New types were different from ordinary geniuses, or the highly gifted, and different from people with already identified extrasensory powers such as telepathy, prescience, psychic photography, teleportation, and even channeling. New types were also capable of simultaneously addressing multiple problems and of projecting their thoughts externally. Dr. Flanagan's greatest scientific achievement came when he realized that the new type concept symbolized not just a unique individual ability, but a positive transformation that all mankind could potentially achieve. It was an idea with universal appeal, but in Zeon, it especially caught the attention of Cecilia Zabi, who realized at once that the Psychomu interface also could be utilized for military ends, and immediately banned any further public mention of the new type concept. Human nature being what it was, however, people tiring of the war nonetheless began to whisper in wishful terms about a new type transformation of all mankind. In reality, of course, nothing had changed at all yet. Yet now, on Texas, a young woman, a true new type, was going into action. Controlling 4-bit modules from the cockpit on her Elmeth mobile armor, she destroyed each individual incoming missile, as well as the public attack ship that had launched them. It was more than just a demonstration of new type potential. It was a terrifying testimony to the abilities of the developers of the Elmeth bit military machine, the scientists of the Flanagan Agency, and the weapons experts under Cecilia's command. Lala had simply sighted the incoming missiles and their mothership and willed an attack on them from her Elmeth. The megaparticle cannons in each bit, a 6-meter diameter machine composed primarily of a small nuclear fusion engine, had automatically trained their sights on the targets and destroyed them all. Perhaps because thought waves flowed in reverse from the Elmeth's Psychomu interface, the action also served to heighten Lala's awareness. Through the Psychomu, she became aware of the presence of Amuro and Shar in the area, and of something terrifying. Something screaming, symbolizing man's basic fighting instinct, rushed toward her like a dark wall of water. There were no audible words or describable sounds, but she knew what it represented. It was the screams and yells of 2 men locked in mortal combat, the war cries of 2 independent conscious beings merging in screams, anger, and fear. Lala was no stranger to the horrors of war, yet she was terrified. In the past, when 2 Federation warships had raked the colony she lived on, she had trembled in fear of her own death, only to experience true horror and despair on learning that her parents, from whom she had become separated, had been killed. But those were memories, something experienced on the periphery of battle. She had imagined before what it would be like for 2 people to deliberately try to kill each other in combat, but the reality of what she now faced was far more frightening. A torrent of conscious thoughts rushed toward her, thoughts trying mightily to dispel fear of death, trying at all costs to avoid being killed. They seemed like a maelstrom, a dark, foreboding image like that of ancient Japanese hell scrolls of 2 demons locked in mortal combat, devouring each other's flesh. She glanced out her cockpit window and beheld a Federation Gundam mobile suit and a Zeon Zaku with weapons flashing. The Gundam's beam saber slashed, and the Zaku's heat axe seared the air. The Zaku was clearly outclassed. Lala screamed, "Commander," but then she sensed yet another thought emerging from the two men's blurred consciousness. It was sharp and clear, like a bright, beautiful light, something that could only involve skill or art. How ironic, she thought, that killing could be perfected only by something so beautiful. From the terror of two men trying to slice each other in two came a force that penetrated right through her. With the sense of sadness tinged with despair, she realized that it was in fact the very same mental quality required to vanquish an enemy in combat. It occurred to Char that he had made an unforgivable error, trying to be a new type when he was not one. He cursed his carelessness, but had no time to dwell on it. The Gundam never gave him a chance. Victory in combat could be assured only by taking advantage of every possible opportunity. History at the very least taught that the best warriors never left victory up to their own fighting spirit or to mere chance. When one was outclassed by an opponent, an appropriate strategy was all the more essential. Only in comic books were battles determined by brute strength alone. I should never have let this business about the red comet go to my head, Char thought. The Gundam's beam saber had him completely on the defensive, but he was not ready to concede victory yet. "You may be a new type," he screamed in the direction of the Gundam pilot, "but you don't have a Psykamu interface." The Gundam, he realized, was without doubt a mechanical marvel, but therein also lay its biggest weakness. There was no evidence that the Federation had developed a mobile suit with anything like a Psykamu interface. While parrying yet another blow of the Gundam's beam saber, Char swung his heat axe at the enemy's extended right arm. Amuro swore. The Gundam's drive system was already at the breaking point, but it worked well enough to avoid the Zaku's thrust one more time. Leaning his machine forward and to the side, Amuro brought the MS's right leg up in a kick to the Zaku's right wrist and sent the heat axe flying into the sand. And then he heard what sounded like a moan or gasp. It did not come from Char. It was a sensation that surged through his brain, from his frontal lobes to the rear, creating an almost audible less than stiopa greater than, and forcing him to rivet his attention to it. A thud brought Amuro back to a more immediate reality. Much to his horror, the Zaku had crashed into the Gundam, and the laser burners in its left fingers were already burning deep into its backpack. Cursing, he countered by smashing the Zaku's mono-eye with the Gundam's left hand and then using the right, which was holding the beam saber, to try to slash down through the base of the Zaku's neck in a diagonal trajectory. As the Gundam's saber beam zapped and flickered, sparks showered on Char's head inside the Zaku cockpit from severed coils and circuitry. "What the?" he yelled. While marveling at the performance of the enemy weapon, he quickly activated his auxiliary camera eye, and with the laser burners in the Zaku's left fingers took aim at the Gundam's eyes and fired. With a whoosh, the blast made a hole between the Gundam's eyes and nose. Next, Char took aim at his opponent's neck. If he could, he wanted to fire a direct laser blast into the mobile suit torso. But then the Gundam's right hand pulled out the beam saber and tried to thrust it through the Zaku's left side. Char yelled in surprise. His Zaku's left arm was no longer usable. And then he heard something that should not have been physically possible. He heard Lala scream, "Commander!" Lala was frantic at the plight of her superior, and her thoughts had turned in wrath on the Gundam, thereby activating and sending the 8 remote control bits on the attack. But Amuro, in the Gundam, had already sensed the presence of another enemy. Disengaging from the Zaku, he ignited the Gundam's verniers and jumped high into the dust clouds, completely avoiding the beam blasts directed at him from the bits. Lala shook with terror. The Elmeth bit combination was supposed to have been invincible, yet the Gundam had easily outmaneuvered her. Meanwhile, the Pegasus and the Zanzibar were about to cross paths in the middle of the colony cylinder. Although few direct hits had been scored, barrages of fire had heavily damaged both warships, and the intense explosions had created enormous cracks here and there in the colony walls. On the Pegasus, Lieutenant Bright and Ensign Mirai had decided that for their final gamble, they would try to cut the enemy off inside the colony. Outside the cylinder, the Pegasus's consort ships, the Saffron and the Cisco, trained their beam cannons through one of the largest holes in the colony wall and waited. Because both the Pegasus and the Zanzibar were in such close proximity, Bright knew his opponent would try to knock his ship out with a single blow or try to increase speed and avoid him. To preempt either action, he immediately tried to destroy the Zanzibar bridge. The more rounded Zanzibar was better armored than the complex Pegasus, but it nonetheless had its weak spots. First, to avoid crashing into the enemy ship, Mirai steered the Pegasus so low that it nearly creased the colony floor, and then she brought the Pegasus's four-deck main cannon level with the Zanzibar's bridge. When the cannon was fired, the blast smashed straight through the ship. Crippled, the ship crashed into the colony's central mountain and then rebounded, floating back in the opposite direction. Firing retrorockets, Mirai braked the Pegasus and narrowly steered her through the 500-meter space between the drifting Zanzibar and the colony floor. Then she swung the prow of her ship toward the Zanzibar's aft mega-particle cannon. Ensign Hayato, waiting on the bridge for this very instant, directed a blast that smashed the Zeon ship's remaining cannon, leaving it a drifting metal hulk with only a few remaining operational missile launch tubes and ship guns. Bright flashed a V sign at Mirai and called out, "Good work," but just then the Zanzibar fired her main engines, and the force of the exhaust struck the Pegasus's starboard prow, driving her skidding into the colony floor. The Zanzibar sliced through a cloud of dust on the parched plain, crashed again into the central mountain, and came to a halt. The entire colony shuddered, as if an earthquake had struck. As Petty Officer Second Class Selah Mass raced across the Texas plain in search of her brother, she saw a flash from the firing of the Zanzibar's main engines, but she could not feel the tremor that followed. Her dune buggy was bouncing too wildly. Appeared heavily damaged, but the hatch opened, and out slid a red-suited young pilot in a platinum-colored helmet with a visor up, revealing an unforgettable face mask. Hitting the ground, he knelt and hunched over and appeared to be coughing, but on second glance Selah realized he was readying an oxygen tank. She checked the pressure gauge on her own normal suit, and saw to her horror that it had dropped dramatically. Too many holes had been blasted in the colony walls. Jumping out of her dune buggy and switching on the voice channel in her normal suit, she cried out, "Casval, it's me, Artesia." The red-suited pilot looked up in surprise and reached for his sidearm, but then as recognition sunk in, he yelled, "Artesia, what in the world are you?" There was no point in completing the sentence. "Are you talking about Amuro, Casval?" Even as she spoke, Selah wondered if some new type potential might not be stirring in herself. Otherwise, she did not see how she could possibly have made it safely this far. The Gundam pilot? Probably so. Then, fastening the air tank to his belt and putting on his oxygen mask, he asked in a muffled voice, "Artesia, are you coming with me or not?" "If not, sister, be a good girl and quit the Federation forces, and don't ever show your face in front of me in uniform again. The military's not for you." Casval. It was too late. He'd already jumped in her dune buggy. As he roared off into a billowing cloud of dust, he yelled, "You've got to go back, Artesia. I'm sure a Federation ship will pick you up." "Casval, wait," she yelled. Ever since she was old enough to remember, it seemed she had yelled the same thing after her brother, and he had always left her behind. Standing alone beside her brother's abandoned red Zaku, Selah felt a tingling sensation inside her head. It was not a result of meeting him again. It was not pain. But it was nonetheless a physical sensation, and it pervaded her entire brain. She looked up at the sky. The voice channel inside her normal suit activated, and amid the static she heard the order, "All hands abandon ship." It was the Pegasus. The ship had finally been dealt a mortal blow. Meanwhile, Lala Sun had entered maximum combat mode. The remotely controlled bit units, oblivious to any and all obstacles, began to randomly attack the Gundam. One self-destructed on the MS's left leg and partly pulverized it. Even strapped in his seat, Amuro's body was being tossed around. His collarbone felt as if it would snap, and he groaned in pain. but he remained aware enough to sense the remaining 7 bits streaming toward him from Lala's Elmeth. He saw no physical trail, but rather the stream of consciousness that connected the bits and Lala. It was like a trace of light reflected through his own brain. He knew they were coming, and he knew this time he had to wait. One more high-speed, high-G dodge would destroy the Gundam's already overloaded powertrain. He would have to gauge the angle of attack from the trace of lights he sensed and try to blow the bits out of the air. Here goes nothing, he thought, knowing it was a gamble. A narrow beam of light flashed out of the Gundam's rifle and miraculously knocked 1 bit out of the air. Normally, concentrating so hard on one target would have left Amuro blind to another's movement, but when the other bits attacked this time, it did not happen. Just as his awareness of the first trace seemed to peak, he sensed others headed toward the Gundam's other leg and its back. Infused with new self-confidence because of his growing powers of perception, he exulted. "I can do it." His attention quickly turned to the mothership controlling the bits. He had no way of knowing about the Psychami system, but he knew that it was theoretically impossible to use radio-controlled weaponry in an area where there was such a high level of Minovsky particles, and that somehow the attacks were originating from the mothership. It could present him with an opportunity. The Gundam creaked badly, but still managed to evade the other 6 attacking bits. Amuro destroyed one, and while his mobile suit swayed from the aftershock, the Elmeth mothership fired a blast from its mega-particle cannon. And this time a clear thought pierced Amuro's brain like an exclamation mark. It was born of a hatred so intense that it revealed to him the beam's angle of impact before he could even see it. He easily evaded the attack. Why, he thought. It was a double-edged query. Why, he thought angrily, was he being attacked like this? And why, thinking of himself, was he able to anticipate the angle of attack in advance? He spun the Gundam toward the direction where he sensed the Elmeth was and plunged through a cloud of sand. As the rounded, flame-shaped Elmeth grew larger and larger on the Gundam's orthoscopic monitor, Amuro saw beyond its physical armor and wiring. He saw an image of grief, and simultaneously from the Elmeth, Lala's son sensed the same thing in Amuro. She saw the grief that lay behind hatred. An identical stream of thought linked 2 physical flesh and blood forms. Less than Lala, what are you doing here? Greater than, Amuro thought. Less than why did you attack? Greater than. Lala started to add the word Shar to her demand, but completed the thought. An identical stream of thought linked 2 physical flesh and blood forms. Less than Lala, what are you doing here? Greater than, Amuro thought. Less than why did you attack? Greater than. Lala started to add the word Shar to her demand, but completed the thought. She loved Never Char. It was a young woman's private, almost secret infatuation, the type tinged with melancholic yearning. Amuro's answer would be too obvious. They were at war. But now a stream of Lala's thought was linked with that of Amuro's and was growing, expanding rapidly. When both streams fused completely into one, it seemed they would explode and soar forever. To her, at least, the experience felt as if it held the potential for the universal transformation, even resurrection, that mankind seemed to be yearning for. Then Amuro remembered the reality of their situation. Less than stop, Lala. It's not you I'm fighting. Stop. Greater than. Less than Amuro. I made a mistake. My feelings for Char made me do it. And now it's too late. I can't stop this process. Greater than. Less than you what? What do you mean you can't stop? Greater than. A scream from Amuro soared into the ether. Less than that's crazy. I'm here. Lala, I'll help you. I'll do anything. Greater than. Less than Amuro. I love you. Greater than. In the midst of despair, Amuro saw an image of Lala's son. Her emerald green eyes widened, and the bodhisattva-like beauty mark in the middle of her brow flared into light. Less than Amuro, I see you too. Greater than. There were no words spoken. Amuro simply knew. His thoughts were hers. Hers were his. They had fused together. A straight line of pure thought flared and soared straight into the heavens. It was perfect. Two separate individuals experienced a perfect empathetic communion. Amuro and Lala's fused consciousness ignited, expanded, and journeyed far into space. Before returning to lodge in human form, it presided over a world where chaos and confusion continued to reign, and where a drama continued to unfold. Salem Mess managed to use her normal suit Vernier jets and escape through a hole in the colony, eventually alighting safely on the Saffron, waiting outside. Ensign Mirai, her hand held by Lieutenant Bright, ran full speed toward the Texas colony's port, as did Ensign Hayato, leading a group of the surviving crew members from the Pegasus. Ensign Kai, piloting the gun cannon, destroyed yet another Zaku and then blasted into space. Shar Aznable resumed command of the Zeon fleet with images of his smiling sister Artesia still in his mind. Other images and sensations fused into one, of Mirai, Bright, and Fra Bo buffeted by wind, of the spirits of Lala's dead father and mother soaring through the heavens, of her mother smiling, of tears in Lala's emerald green eyes, of the sound of crying, of the sound of a life force from a woman's womb, crying its lungs out. Whose voice could it be? Mirai, Sayla, Fra Bo, Matilda Ajan. Who was it? Lala. No, the Lala of the fused consciousness could only scream in grief, but somewhere there was an embryonic life, surrounded in warmth, with heart beating, a new life. Thump, thump, thump. A strong, steady pulse, a vital pulse. The sound of life itself, so beautiful, so all-enriching. Lala and Amuro's fused consciousness flowed out in a wave of light over a panorama of Earth. Metamorphosing through the colors of the spectrum and finally becoming gold, the light passed by the Zeon fleet that left from the Granada moon base. Passed by the fierce fight that ensued between it and the defensive wing of General Revel's main fleet. Passed by before it was clear if Revel would get by Solomon and attack Granada directly. The light, in a torrent, somehow testified to the fact that the Pegasus would survive. The sound of the heartbeat, the symbol of life, of survival. Amuro and Lala's fused consciousness sensed beyond. The dark force of the Zabi ruling family, flowing into and disappearing in an instant of light. The light, without which no one would know how long mankind's future would last, no one would know. The physical Lala tried to abandon herself to the flow of light. The fused part of her consciousness knew that once the two of them were no longer joined, they would no longer be able to see the flow of light. Would other new types emerge in Lala's place? Were not she and Amuro gazing into the infinity of future precisely because history promised the appearance of new types? All thoughts transpired in an instant. All thoughts transpired in an eternity. The Gundam, under full power, smashed into the Elmeth. Amuro's conscious mind awoke with a shock, and he tried at the last moment to deflect the trajectory of the Gundam's beam saber. But it was too late. The beam saber connected directly with the weakest section of the Elmeth, its cockpit. In an instant, it incinerated Lala's young flesh and spirit, and penetrated all the way to the engine. The bits began flying madly and randomly in the colony air and smashed into its floor. Lala disappeared into a torrent of light and dissolved into the flow of eternal time. Amuro had killed the person he needed more than anyone else in the whole universe. He screamed a cry of despair. "What have I done?" In wretched disbelief, he put the Gundam in reverse, and the instant he did so, he saw the fuselage of the Elmeth suddenly mushroom in size. A second later, his Gundam was blown by the fusion blast into the colony wall. The wall warped and ruptured, and then the Gundam was tossed into outer space. In a ball of light, the Gundam's cockpit escape mechanism went into action. The mobile suit's upper and lower torso separated, and the cockpit module transformed into the core fighter. "Lala! Lala!" Amuro screamed, half delirious. "Lala! Was it all a dream? As his core fighter was tossed from the area by the blast he mercifully slipped into, mumbling unconsciousness. But the fused awareness he had shared with Lala was not a dream. They had seen a future, and the future was one of promise. It was real, and it was burned into Amura's mind. He knew that although only he and Lala had seen it, it did not belong only to them. It was vast, it was universal, and now he could rest. Sleep would be but a brief respite before he emerged from the depths of despair to fulfill his final destiny. Mankind still was not aware that new types had awakened, but a new future had already begun. It was 0080 UC, and the war was still not over. This is the conclusion of Awakening, the first volume of the Gundam series. Watch for the second volume, Escalation, coming from Del Rey Books in November 1990, about the author. Yoshiyuki Tomino is the creator of Gundam, beginning with the first animated television series in 1979 in Japan. Later, he authored numerous novels, using the characters he developed, as well as other film and television projects in the Gundam universe. He lives in Tokyo, Japan. About the Translator. Frederik Schodt is a writer, translator, and interpreter based in San Francisco. A longtime fan of Japanese fantasy, he also likes robots, both imaginary and real. Among the books he has authored are Manga, The World of Japanese Comics, and Inside the Robot Kingdom, Japan, Mechatronics, and the Coming Robotopia.